Hey everybody, Jason here. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know once again about the contest we are running on ENGN for a few more days. This episode is dropping on the 15th and the contest will be over on Tuesday the 19th at around 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. The contest has some awesome prizes and we have unlocked more since last week. So the Herbaceous Sunset Over Water prize pack is still there. Another entrant will win a copy of either Hoplomachus Origins or Comancheria of their choice. And if we can get 75 likes on our Geeklist, we will unlock the third prize, which is Legacy of Dragonholt. Yes, Legacy of Dragonholt. We've talked about it on the show. People have been loving on it, deservedly so. So if we can get to 75 likes on our Geeklist, then we will unlock that third prize for one of the entrants. How do you enter? Entering is very, very simple. All you have to do is go to our Facebook page, which is linked in the show notes, and join the group. We're approving basically everybody. So as long as you're not a Nigerian bot or something like that, we are going to approve you. The second thing you can do for a separate entry, you can get one entry for joining the Facebook group. You can also go to the Geeklist, which is also in the show notes, and put a comment in the general comment section. So two ways to enter. You can enter either way. If you do both, you will get credit for 5 entries. I really hope that's clear. So very easy to join and very easy to unlock more and more prizes. So more people joining the Facebook group is always good. Let's get to 75 likes at least on the Geeklist. The more likes, the more visible that the Geeklist is, it'll attract more folks. So thank you very much for everybody who has participated so far. And for those of you who have not participated yet, come on in, give the Facebook group a join and leave immediately. We are just looking to get as much exposure as possible. So we appreciate everybody who has participated, in all seriousness. So yeah, there you go. In terms of the episode itself, this is another one of our designer roundtables. I'm going to split the episode into 2 parts, mostly for user friendliness purposes. I know a lot of people listen to the show on commute. People's commutes tend to be around 45 minutes to an hour. Hopefully for you, you're not sitting there for 2-3 hours like some friends of mine. So yeah, I think that it works in terms of having the discrete sections so that you don't have to worry about pausing, finding a spot in the middle if you lose it, all that kind of thing. However, that is not going to stop me from releasing both episodes at once. So it's one conversation. You're going to get both parts at once. I hope that you enjoy it. So that's it for announcements. On to the show. Every Night is Game Night, episode 91. Designer Roundtable about solo variants with Ricky Royal, Keith Matejka, and Mike Mullins. Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to the Every Night is Game Night podcast. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you listened to our show about a month to 6 weeks ago, you will have heard our first designer roundtable, something I was really excited to put forward because it just took a bunch of designers who are really passionate about what they're doing and got them to talking about, a subject of interest to you. So last time it was fantasy adventure. This time it is designing and playing solo variants. So a lot of our folks that listen to the show are into solo. They, not just the solo that comes out of the box, but like making solos and exploring different ways to, get as much use out of their games as possible. So I figured, what the hey, I know some people in the solo verse who'd love to jump on a podcast. Let's get them all together and do another designer roundtable. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the 3 gentlemen who responded to the bat signal. Actually, what would a solo bat signal look like? Would it just be like a one finger sticking up in the air? Something like that.
Let's go with that, yeah.
There you
as
go.
long as it's the right finger.
An inviting finger, not the other one.
Yeah.
All right. So we are going to go in alphabetical order for introductions. First, we have Keith Matejka, who is the founder of Thunderworks Games. He is responsible for the excellent role player, the game, and with a solo variant that is baked in, as well as the solo modes for Herbaceous and Sunset Over Water. Welcome to the show, Keith.
Thank you.
Did I get that pronunciation of your name?
Yeah, you
correct?
did get the pronunciation right. There's a couple additional titles I did do a solo variant for my game Bullfrogs,
Yes.
which was kind of my first foray into solo gaming. And I did the solo variant for Herbaceous Sprouts, which is kind of wrapping up on Kickstarter right now. So I got kind of, I guess, 5 titles in terms of solo under my belt at this point.
You got some cred. There you go. That's
what
this is all about. We're establishing cred right now.
Yeah.
All right.
Cred confirmed.
There it is. Achievement unlocked. All right, so time to establish some credit for our other two gentlemen who have joined us tonight. So I have with me Mike Mullins. He is the co-designer of Bottom of the Ninth, which is probably what you know him for, but he is also a frequent collaborator with Button Shy Games, all sorts of games under his belt, including Circle the Wagons and Pentaquark. Mike, did I get all of your titles right?
Yeah, there might be a few more tossed around. Let's see, I did Ahead in the Clouds with Button Shy as well, the variant for that, and the one that really got me into it was Castle Dice with Fun to 11.
Awesome. And this man, if you are a soloist, you probably need no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. He is Richard Wilkins, a.k.a. Ricky Royal. He is the primary designer of Renegade, which is out from Victory Point Games, and he is most well known for his work on the Box of Delights YouTube channel. Welcome to the show, Ricky.
Hi, Jason. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Hi, Keith. Hi, Mike.
How you doing?
Hi, good.
And you have tried your hand at a couple of solo modes, is that right?
Yeah, one or two. Yeah, a whole heap. If you head over to boxofdelights.net, you'll find a page full of solo variants at the South Pen. I've had a couple published. So Guilds of London with Tony Boydell. I did a solo variant for that. That was credited. And Pax Premier as well with Sierra Madre Games and Cole Worley. Yeah, that one. So it's, yeah, but yeah, probably credited as Ricky Royal, I think, if you check those rather than Renegade is the first one with my name on the box. Yeah.
Richard Wilkins, who is this guy?
Exactly. Yeah.
Some nobody. All right. So thank you guys so much. This is a little bit of a difficult trick to pull off. Obviously, you hear that Ricky is recording from London. Keith is I know in Wisconsin.
I'm in Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah.
Madison, Wisconsin. And Mike, where are you recording from?
Pennsylvania.
Okay, so you're a nice East Coaster. Okay.
There you go.
At least somebody's in my time zone. So we have to, do a little bit of scheduling gymnastics, but we definitely are very, very excited to bring you this. What I have done, just like with the last one, I've reached out to all sorts of folks in BGG and some other surprises that I will be revealing as we go on. And most of this will be asking your questions. So think of it like a convention or an AMA. I'm just kind of taking everything that you guys have asked, putting it in a little bit of an order so that the conversation has a little bit of flow, makes some sense. But let's start, let's get to know some of these guys a little bit. So Cian Hakaday from BGG asked this introductory 2-part question. How did you get into solo gaming and how did you get into designing variants for solo games? So let's go in alphabetical order. We'll start with Keith.
Sure. So solo gaming for me kind of came out of requests and demands from backers on Kickstarter projects. So, I think solo gaming is, obviously been kind of growing in popularity over the last 4 years or so, 5 years. And, there was requests coming from backers on my Kickstarter projects who were like asking for single player versions. And I honestly, I did a little bit of solo gaming, like with some Arkham Horror a long time ago. But it's just like an interesting design challenge. And I think at this point, that's kind of an expectation, especially on the Kickstarter front, of like people want to see a single player version included in the game, even if they're not like big single player players, but they definitely see the added value of it being there and like having that option. If they can't get their buddies together, they can still kind of pull the game out and play it. Mm-hmm. So I've tried to include a single player game variant or mode for all the games that I've worked on. So even on the role player one, like I wasn't originally intending on doing one, but there was kind of enough requests or people asking for it that I was like, okay, I'll let me figure this out. So like myself, like I play primarily multiplayer games, but I definitely love the challenge of the single player design. So and and then I had done a handful of them. I started then to get some requests from other publishers to pick up that portion of the design work on their titles. So that's kind of where it grew from, and hopefully that will continue. So,
absolutely. All right, Pike. What about you? How did you get into solo gaming, and how did you get into designing those variants?
Well, it's funny to hear Arkham Horror mentioned, because that was one of my first, like hobby style games that I ever purchased. And then I banged out so many games solo, playing like giant teams of 8 or, focused teams of 2. And I played Arkham Horror solo forever.
Wait, you played Arkham Horror with all 8 characters?
Yeah.
Good
I would have Arkham-tober. And so I would leave it set up for all Halloween. And I played like a solo 8-player all expansions game before, and it was insane. I mean, it took me days. I would play it for a while and then walk away and play it. Yeah. Oh my word. But absolutely, yeah. I played the heck out of that thing.
The real challenge is just playing with one character, right?
Oh, trust me, I've soloed the thing. I haven't won very often soloing it, but yes, I played it true solo. And then my foray into design basically came with the castle dice that I mentioned, where it seemed. So for those that don't know, it's a dice drafting castle building game, and it seemed like it would work solo. And so I contacted the designer, Luke Peterschmidt, when the Kickstarter was going, and I said, hey, is this soloable? And he basically said, no, you want to give it a try? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, make a solo. Okay. So I, gave it a shot, and he's pretty local to where I am. He's only about an hour and a half away, so drove up there to Fun to 11 headquarters and showed him what I had, and that was my first solo design credit.
All right, very cool. So then, Ricky, it's funny because to solo gamers, you've just always been there. You're kind of an institution among soloists. It's always a reference. Okay, just go check Ricky Will if you want to learn X, Y, and Z game. But it had to come from somewhere, right? Where did you first start getting into the solo stuff?
I guess. Well, you saying that is probably indicative of how recent solo gaming seems. But right. Certainly, I think when I first saw hobby games being soloed was watching another YouTuber, which was a chap named Robert. He was, I don't know if he's still in. He was in Japan. He's an American. He had the Black Belt Gaming channel. So he's somebody who I ran into on YouTube. I was watching Rodney Smith. I think one of his first videos was Mansions of Madness, I think. Mm-hmm. And then Robert's Black Belt Gaming was something like Castle Ravenloft or something like that, the Dungeons and Dragons. So I watched those. But I mean, I grew up playing chess, and I was a bit of a swot, and I would study the game over the board on my lonesome and play both sides. So I had, for a lot of years, it was playing both sides of a chessboard. But yeah, modern board gaming. Well, when would that have been? 2011, 2012, something like that. So the last 6 years, it's grown out of watching other people and really gaining. I didn't know these games really existed before then. So, and it's 2012 sounds like only yesterday, but yeah. It's.
We were talking before the call. 2012 is actually eons ago in board game years. It is a long time.
Yes.
All right. So let's go to a question from BG user Travis Morton, aka Knuckles29. So more on the personal end of things, the personal dimension of solo gaming. What are your all-time favorite solo variants for games? So give me like one or two that are just absolutely unquestionably sing for you as these are amazing solo variants that I'm going to play forever.
I mean, the first one that comes to mind is Mage Knight. Mage Knight solo is just fantastic. I don't know if it counts as enough of a variant, but I mean, certainly you have your deck that represents more of a timer than anything else, and I'll play Mage Knight forever.
All right, I agree with that. That's my number one solo as well.
Right. The type of stuff that I really like to play solo are things that are real narrative focused. Like exploring the story is super interesting to me in the solo experience. So, I think Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective is a big one for me. And we mentioned Arkham and even I think the Arkham Horror card game is also like a great experience solo.
That's excellent.
So I mean, even like I like to play Near and Far by Red Raven solo, just because of the strong narrative element to it. So
How do you implement your own solo variant? Because there's not one in the box, at least now.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. So I think I like to go through it and then kind of see what kind of score I get, and it's all about, to me, experiencing the story element of it, of go through the story arcs for all the different characters.
Oh, the different paths and stuff like that. Yeah, you can that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. I'll always like I'll take a choice path, and it's like, okay, I'll just kind of rewind that. Great thing about solo players is like nobody's looking, so it's like I'm gonna walk that back a couple steps.
Right. That's for me personally. That's definitely one of the more challenges about playing single player stuff. Is like I need somebody to keep me honest. Like I'm so inclined to cheat, and then like, am I ruining my own experience and feeling bad about it afterwards or whatever? So that's always kind of a struggle for me.
All right. So Ricky, what would be your, I guess, all-time solo variant that you would come back to again and again?
Yeah. Well, solo game. I mean, it's interesting. You phrased it variant. So I don't know. I mean, some of the games you mentioned, like Mage Knight, Consulting Detective, these aren't necessarily variants, but they're designed to play solo. So, but for games that are designed to play solo, Mage Knight is right up there. I did my top 100 solo games. You guys were doing top 100 co-ops, and I was doing top 100 solo. Was Hoplomachus from Chip Theory Games, and it's still sitting on the top of that list at the moment, I think. I like game.
They did that's basically a 2-player game that they did a variant for. So
yeah, kinda. I mean, there's components in the box that are only for solo, so it's kind of not a variant per se. But yeah, it's right up there. And the same for Mage Knight, really. I mean, I think that's a game that plays better with one than any other. But
it's my favorite player count too.
Yeah, there you go. So, but yeah, I like games that offer a real brain burning puzzle. That would be my kind of that's my buzz, really. It's, one of the problems that gets cited for a lot of co-op games is analysis paralysis, or even multiplayer games, because people sit there and they mull over the board for too long. While playing solo, analysis paralysis is a magic ingredient for me. That's something I like to do, is sit and study. So I'm happy with games that offer a lot of strategy, but also throw up a lot of drama. And Hoplo is one of those ones that does a little bit of that. It's got lots of positional play, and it's got some dice in there that give you that drama as well. So yeah, that's my.
So AP is like a feature, not a bug for you.
Nice.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So all right, let's get into some different types of solo variants, because that's why we're here. Okay, so I broke this up into 2 sections. So the first perspective I'm going to tackle this for is kind of that player perspective of what kind of solo variants do we like to play. So I reached out to a bunch of folks trying to put the show together, and I got a chance to talk with Dale Bonacore, BGG user ELAD. People, if you are any kind of solo player, you've probably played an ELAD variant without knowing, because he has all sorts of stuff. He's done stuff for at the Games' Lightest Lanterns, Roll for the Galaxy. He's done Power Grid, Dominant Species. He's done so many different solo variants, and they're all over BGG. So what he did, he was good enough to kind of break down his types of solo games, and I wanted to get your thoughts on if this is if you guys agree with how he kind of breaks it down. So he says that there are 3 types of variants that you could set up for a game. The first is the simplest, which is the high score variant, which is, you play the game straight with some kind of round limit, you have 12 rounds to get some type of score, or there's some type of ghost opposition, they're just here, I'll take this resource, but mostly you're playing a game and you're just time limited on it. The second variation is some kind of win condition. You win or you lose. So Terraforming Mars, you either hit all the 3 tracks or you don't, or you get an active bot. So the bot being some kind of, AI that's an opponent to you, and the AI could be either, tuned different ways. It could feel like a human being. It could feel like all sorts of other stuff. So those are the kind of 3 different types of solo variants that are out there, according to ELAD. So before I kind of move on, do you guys agree with that, or can you think of other ways of approaching solo variants?
Yeah, that's Ricky here. That was an interesting perspective. I thought about this earlier today. What are the different categories of solo game? And I guess what he's done there is categorize the games by the victory condition. I hadn't thought of doing that before. I was kind of thinking of categorizing them. If I was thinking what types of solo games, it would be more by the mechanisms within the game, such as, do you use complete randomness to determine how your opponent plays, or do you use heuristics? So I saw, a purely deterministic method. So my view was that solo games fit on this sliding scale of determinism, heuristics at one end, and pure random at the other, and all solo games fit on that sliding scale. So that's kind of how I saw it. But yeah, it's interesting to define it by the victory conditions. That's a good point.
Yeah, definitely. I've given a fair amount of thought to it, and some of what Elad says definitely kind of I think of this in a similar way, but I also think there's some overlap there as well. So I think you can be in multiple of those categories at the same time. For example, in the role player expansion, the single player version, there's like a win-loss condition in terms of like you either beat the monster or you don't. But then if you, and this in Herbaceous Sprouts, it kind of works the same. It's like if you can beat the AI, then you're in the winning category, and then there's like a high score on top of that. So it's like, I like the idea that you have, something that you're trying to beat, but then also a way to measure after you kind of hit the win condition, like how well did you win? Because one of the things that I like about the high score, the simplest way, is that hopefully there's something that's driving you to keep getting better at the game. And sometimes when there's just kind of a simple win-loss, like it's hard to compare, win number one against win number two, unless you have some kind of scale to measure that on.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing too. Is I think today as well, with a lot of people that we, maybe the likes of us, talk to in the gaming circles, is we tend to play a lot of games and don't necessarily play the same, one game lots of times. So having a binary win-lose condition is good when you only want to play once or twice and you're playing lots of different games. If you're someone who has one game and you want to play it 100 times, having a binary win-lose isn't necessarily enough. You want to have that scoring system as well that says, how well did I do? Yeah, I think that's a great addition to any binary win-lose game, is to have a how well did I win. For the folks who, not everyone's got a lot of money, not a lot of people have a lot of exposure to a lot of games. If you've only got one or two games in your collection, you're playing them constantly, give those folks a scoring system to give them that extra level of enjoyment. Absolutely, it's a good idea.
It's funny because I'm sorry, I'll get to you, Mike, in a second. I just want to comment on Ricky because so Renegade, which you have out, I've heard a lot of review chatter saying that they're happy enough to just beat the game. But you did make sure to include a point system so you figure out how well you win. I think you just answered why you did that. Is that part of the reasoning why you did that, to get that constant play if that's like one of your only games?
Yeah, when I design a solo game, I want to design a game that I want to play and have it play the way I want it to. So yeah, I'm happy to have a scoring system in there. Thematically, it made sense as well because when you play computer games, you always get a high score, right? Pinball or Space Invaders. I sound so old. They don't have those games anymore, do they?
I didn't want to say I know what those games are.
Yeah, there you go. So I play board games, but there you go. It's great to have a score. I mean, we had play testers who played the games over 100 times, and they wanted to keep score. So, absolutely. Awesome. Put it in there. Why not?
All right, go
But you
for
don't
it.
have to use it. You don't have to use it. I mean, you can. If you've got one thing I don't like personally, and this isn't just solo games, but in game groups, is you get to the end of the game and then you've got to spend half an hour totting up all your score. That kind of puts me off a little bit. So I like the game to finish when it finishes and know whether I won or lost, and Renegade does that. And but it's great to be able to say, hey, how well did I do, and take that extra 5 minutes to do it. So, that's
like awesome. Even in multiplayer games, like filling out a spreadsheet after the game is over is like something I really don't like doing. It's like my day job, my old day job. I used to work in spreadsheets all the time. So when I'm sitting down to play a game, the last thing I want to do is fill out a spreadsheet to figure out who won. So I much prefer some kind of tracker or some other method to kind of determine points than like getting out the piece of paper and writing everybody's name at the top and like going through each category. I don't know. I just really don't like that.
Yeah, if you look at most Euro games, there's a score tracker that goes around the outside, and it's a common feature of games to have a score. Highest score wins. Well, if you're playing solo, what do you do if that highest score wins? Well, you beat your highest score. That's it sounds perfectly valid. Yeah.
All right, what do you think, Mike?
Well, there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on. One, concerning the whole idea of a high score and ranges. People always ask me, what do I need to include to make this like a quote-unquote legitimate solo? And there's two pieces of advice that I get to people. One is any solo-only component, throw in one die or a single solo player card or whatever. So it's not just rules in the back of the book. It immediately legitimizes your efforts in the eyes of some solo players. Pardon me. But the other thing is the idea of the score ranges, because it shows people that you've actually played your own game. So many times I've taken a game out that I was excited about, played the solo, and it's very clear that it was played once or twice to make sure that it worked, and then that was all the attention that was given. So like if you've included this solo range or a range of scores, you now know what is tough to reach and what's an achievable goal, and it just shows people that you know what you're doing a little bit. So that's how I feel about the score ranges. And this whole thing started talking about types of solo games, and Ricky mentioned the sort of a slider between deterministic and random. When I think of types of solo games, I think of two sliders. One is the level between deterministic and random, and the other is for the level of involvement of the game itself. So on one side, you would have there's no change for solo player. You just play. So it's Agricola. You just play it and see how well you do. And then on the other side is the fully automated bot. You have to play against an active participant. And somewhere in between is, resources get stolen or cards get cycled. And so, it changes the game state. And so you take those two sliders and all of a sudden you have, all right, well, I'm rolling a ton of dice, but all the other decisions are guaranteed. So that's how I'm going to set those two sliders. That's how I conceive of types of solo games.
It's funny to hear you guys, all three of you, are talking pretty well about the score system. And it's funny to hear you guys say that, because a lot of solo gamers will go exactly the opposite way, because they'll say stuff like, oh, is it a high score variant or is it a real solo? Like as if the high score variant is not a real solo, So have you guys encountered that? And what would you say to a solo gamer who was saying that? It's like, okay, my game is a high score variant. That's the solo. It's like, oh, that's it?
Well, I think it's absolutely legitimate, because I assume they're referring to is, okay, this is a 2 to 4 player game. I'll just say you can also play against yourself and get a high score, and say now it plays 1 to 4. That's what the complaint is. So there's two different things we're talking about here. One is a straight up high score variant where that's it, and the other is a well-designed solo experience that incorporates a score ladder. And I think those are two different things, and one is a legit complaint, and the other is a well-designed variant that happens to have a high score.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think that it depends on the game as well, because I mentioned Euro games earlier. With a lot of Euro games that have higher score wins, and this is why you have to be careful when you're doing solo games that use scoring as its main win condition, because in a game like that where you've got highest score wins, it depends how the game is played and the style of the players and the different strategies that are deployed. In some games, you could have a high score in game one, that wins the game is 20 points, and then in game two, the high score might be 90 points because players have played a different style of game. They may have used some turtling strategies, or maybe been more conservative, or been maybe more aggressive towards each other. So if you're creating a variant for a game that has that scores that vary greatly, but still deliver a win in the multiplayer, and then you're trying to develop a solo variant, if you say a winning score has to be 90 plus, then you're forcing players to play a certain way to get that score. And maybe that's where there's some legitimacy in the criticism, because it depends on the game.
Yeah, so like there's some games that just have optimal strategies, and the challenge in the multiplayer game is people frustrate that optimal strategy and you have to do something else and whatever. Yeah. But without that opposition, the optimal strategy is open for you to do, and you just do it.
Yeah. So if you have a binary thing that says, if you've got different opponents, so you've got a human, you've got an aggressive player, and you've got a conservative player, defensive player. When you're playing them, and you get to, it's the same frustration will be felt if you're playing those people for the first time, because you don't know your opponent. But if you've played them 5, 6, 10 times and you've learnt about that opponent, if you're going to deliver then a solo variant for that game, you've got to deliver opponents that play with those different styles, and that's the difficulty for designers designing solo variants for multiplayer games, is understanding their game and how it's played and what are the strategies that are deployed. And if you're going to use a score, if the high score is not the thing that drives it, but how you outperform your opponent, however, whether they play for a low win or a high win, you've got to come up with something different than high score. If you're developing a game with solo in mind, you're not just trying to build a variant on a multiplayer, then you can build your scoring system around that. So it really depends which way round. This is not a one size fits all. This is why there's lots of different, as Bunakor was it said, you use different types of solo victory conditions, because not one fits all those games, and you can't apply all three to one game. Mm-hmm. I think that's why there's lots of variety. And also, I think because and it depends on who's playing as well. Like I say, a lot of people these days want to play a game once and then pack it up and move on. If you deliver them a high score, it kind of becomes a little bit meaningless, because you've got to play repeatedly for that high score to start to mean something. I think. Yeah.
So I think of Sunset Over Water is one of my absolute favorite games of this year. I gotta say, I really do. I was floored when I played it. It's so cool. But I can't get to the highest score. I can get to the second highest score.
Right.
So I guess it creates that impulse to play more. I'm kind of torn, actually, because I go back to what Mike was saying about randomness, because sometimes I feel like I want to play this. I want to play this. I want to play this. Sometimes I feel like I can only get the highest score if the luck breaks my way, which is a kind of a defeating thing. So it kind of does both. I'm not really sure if that was the effect you were intending for.
With most games, I think with most good games, there's an element of luck, right? So it's like, to some degree, it creates variety within the experience, and in terms of like balancing where those tiers should exist. I think solo players in particular like things that are a little bit on the hard side. If there was no challenge there, then there'd be like no reason to keep playing it, right? So, sometimes it is there's a game that has a fair amount of luck. That game is it's interesting going in on those projects, because the core design is set, right? So I just come in and I'm like, okay, how can I take this multiplayer game and convert it to a compelling single player game without redesigning the whole thing? It's still, there's a couple bullet points for me. It's like, it needs to feel as much like the multiplayer game as possible, but I always want to make sure that there's some bells and whistles specific to make the single player game more interesting. So, in that game, there's a certain amount of randomness of when cards come out. There's multiple decks of cards coming out. So some of the things that I try to reduce, I try to reduce some of the randomness in terms of like in the multiplayer game, you pull a hand of 3 cards, and then you pick one to use. Whereas in the multiplayer game, those cards are sitting out in front of you, and you're kind of choosing what order they come out in. So that was like one of the ways that I tried to reduce the randomness in the game, so that people wouldn't have that experience of like saying, well, I'm only going to get that high score if I just get really lucky, which I know at the end of the day it can be not the greatest feeling. So, I mean, it's just something that I'm aware of. It's like a balance between making sure that it's challenging enough for people to keep wanting to play it, and then, but then not make it feel like the only way to get the highest score is that if you're just ridiculously lucky. So,
yeah, I don't think that's uncommon though. I think with most solos, to achieve the top score in a range or whatever it happens to be, you have to get lucky and play well. Like that's just
It's part of the deal.
And yeah, it's part of the deal. I mean, you look at one of my other favorites to play is Ghost Stories. Okay, if you don't get lucky playing Ghost Stories, you get crushed. Like it's very, very difficult. So you need those ghosts to come out at the right spot, at the right time. And if you know that going in, some people are still into that, and some people are like, oh, I hate that because it's too hard or it's impossible or whatever. And it's the same sort of thing. I enjoy the Sunset Over Water solo quite a bit myself, but I can see from the first handful of commissions that come out and the way the board's laid out, I can be like, oh man, because that's part of the way it works. You lose some of the commissions from round to round. Like I'm going to lose big point commissions on the first 2 rounds. I'm in trouble, and just because I played it enough, I can see how that works. That's not a bad thing though.
Yeah.
It's like, can I overcome it? Oh, I couldn't quite overcome it,
I mean, that happens to me even in multiplayer games. It's like I'm 3 rounds into a game of Gloomhaven. I'm like, this isn't going to happen. So,
yep,
so then I
sure.
just like, I restart and I start over again. It's like,
Yeah, as when you're as a solo designer, you're facing that challenge. It's if you're designing a multiplayer game, you're what you're trying to do is avoid player elimination or having one player get left too far behind. When you're designing a solo game, you want to make sure that your soloist has not lost too soon before they're they're a couple of rounds in. You've got to give something that makes them want to keep playing and not just pack up straight away.
Yeah, you got to string them along before you crush them.
Yes. Smoking like a true Arkham Horror player. I love what you said before, Mike. What was that slide you talked about where it was the kind of light opposition versus heavy opposition? Let's talk about before we get to the actual like your design processes. Let's talk about the bot approach. And that quote unquote active opposition. So like the bot can take a bunch of different forms. It can be very simple, like in the role player, the base. I haven't played the expansion, but the base one was just a black die, and the black die just took away cards and stuff. So that's like the lightest version of an active opponent. And then it goes all the way to like an Automa deck, or like even beyond that, the Anachrony bot or something like that. So Morten Monrad Pedersen, who is the guy who designs bots. I could have invited him on the show, but he's been on our pod before. So please go back into our back catalog, into our Geeklist, and check out the episode we did with Morten Monrad Pedersen and David Stuckey to get his thoughts. But so I asked him for questions, and one of his questions was about bots. And he says, how important is it that a bot should feel like a human player? So sometimes the Automa decks, the biggest criticism is that they feel like madmen because they're just kind of card playing out, doing random things. Is it important for a bot to feel human, like you're feeling like you're playing a player, or is it more important to make sure that mechanically it's giving you the biggest challenge? So because those aren't always the same thing.
I think there's another element there too of like flow of play. I think sometimes when you get into those Automa decks, they can feel heavy in terms of administration between turns. And that's one of the reasons why I have not explored that avenue a whole lot, just because I like my single players to keep moving, and sometimes when I've used those decks before, it really bogs down my game and kind of sucks a little bit of the fun out of it.
Yeah, I've found that bots are pretty polarizing with people that I've talked to, where some folks just don't want to play against an extra opponent. The whole point is that they're playing by themselves. They don't want to, do, whether they're complaining about that it's fiddly, they have to do all these things to represent the opponent, or what other people consider even a bigger sin is that you have to make the occasional decision on behalf of the opponent,
Right.
which personally does not bother me, because I think it's actually a difficulty slider. Like, I could just make a random choice for that opponent, or I could make the best choice and make it a little harder on myself or whatever. But some people just don't want a full opponent. They want resources to go away, cards to cycle, and some dice. And then that's the opponent, where if you're making a full tableau for them and moving people around the board or whatever happens to be, then it's too much work for a solo. So I've played all kinds. I don't mind a little extra legwork for myself, but it certainly is polarizing.
Yeah, I think the approach of the Automabot is to take away as much administration as possible, and I think the way Morton puts it is resent the shell of opposition. So like just the points where an opponent would interact with you, and then just kind of like skip the rest. So like it cheats. I think of like the Race for the Galaxy bot. So I think that was one of the first ones, really. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Race.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But like, it's rolling dice, and it's getting cards because it just gets cards in the flip, and it cheats its face off. I mean, it just, you have a 6-card development now. Nothing, you don't have to do anything for that. You just get it.
Solos have to cheat because they can't think.
Right.
They have to cheat.
Yeah, it's like, it's I think it's very naive to say I want an AI opponent that plays like a human. That's not possible in cardboard, right? Not, we have AlphaGo playing using computer power that's unimaginable. You can't recreate that with a deck of cards or a dice. If you want a challenging opponent, then your opponent will have to break the rules. But I think what Automa does and other systems like that, we were talking before we joined about. I mentioned Conflict of Heroes, which has that's Ueca's game with a deck of cards that delivers that randomness for your opponent, but every card has its own small little heuristic. So it's kind of determinism mixed with randomness. It's in the middle of that sliding scale. So it delivers something that's very quick and playable, but has a lot of randomness too, and does lots of cheating. So it has to because it can't outthink you. It has to break the rules for sure. But yeah, I mean, those kind of systems have been going for a long time. We have we talked about. I mentioned Butterfield and RAF Battle of Britain and D-Day at Omaha Beach. The counterinsurgency system, the states of siege systems, all of those things use card draws to do random stuff to emulate an opponent doing stuff, and they will up the ante and put pressure on you as a soloist to outplay them using your brain power. Those things are perfect for me. But coin is maybe the counterinsurgency stuff is probably for a lot of, and it's a matter of taste maybe, because for a lot of that game. It's kind of the opposite of the Automa, because you've got all these flow charts and stuff to follow, and probably 75% of the time what you're doing is just acting stuff out. You're not actually making decisions for 3 of the other bots, but a lot of people like that. They just like to see what happens now, and it's all deterministic. None of that's random in the coin system. It's all just follow this flow chart, but that's different styles of solo game. And then you've got things like what you did with Bullfrogs, Keith, where you've got a die roll, but then you've got a set of rules that says if you roll this, do this, and if you roll that, do that. It's randomness mixed with heuristic. So you're kind of trying to balance that random chaos of a human opponent with playability. So
like, I don't consider the pair of dice in AI in any kind of stretch of the imagination. It's just like this crazy madman that's doing random stuff, and you're just like trying to keep him under control while you're getting points on the side,
Well, it's like you could do that random opponent could do 6 sensible things, but which of the if the soloist knows which of those 6 sensible things he's going to do, then you can preempt it all the time. It's purely deterministic. But what your dice is doing is saying, I'm going to do one of these 6 random things, but you don't know which one. but one of those things will make sense once it's acted out, and that's cool. That's what these other systems do, and what Automa does as well. It says, and there's a lot of psychology too, because I had this when I was doing Renegade, because in Renegade I'm using dice, and the Bullfrogs are using dice. In bottom of the ninth, it's all cards, and then there's dice as well. It's all, what happens is random, but you've got cards there too. But as soon as you introduce that dice, it makes people think this is random. And then if you use, say, Automa system where it's just a deck of cards, the mechanism's the same. It's just making something random happen, but it's doing it with a card draw rather than a die.
Right.
So there's a lot of psychology as a solo designer. What am I going to use? Cards, dice, flowcharts. What's my audience? What are they going to appreciate more, I guess?
All right. And what does the game call for? What fits within the game? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you guys very much. That's kind of like in terms of what we like and what we like in terms of the experience of the solo variants. Let's get into picking your brains about designing solo variants. And we are going to get to their thoughts on designing solo variants in part 2 of the podcast, which will be in the feed simultaneously with this one, so you won't have to wait too long for that. I hope you are enjoying our little ludological detour in the show. This isn't something that we ordinarily do. We do reviews and, hopefully get a discussion around the games. But this time we get to go under the hood and have a little bit of fun with that. Like I said, I hope that you are enjoying it and getting a lot out of it. So go ahead and please, while I'm here, encourage you once again to enter our contest and to participate in our little community. So you can do so by joining the Facebook group Every 90s Game Night. You can also please leave a comment on the Geeklist and give us a like on that Geeklist as well. If we receive 75 likes on the Geeklist, I will add a prize to the contest that I told you about at the beginning of the show. Free games. There you go. So besides the contest, you can also reach out to us at ENGN_podcast on the Twitter, at every90sgamenight.com. You can also find the podcast wherever you can find those podcasts, iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all that kind of thing. And while you're there, please drop us a rating, 5 stars or however many stars you think we deserve. So that's going to do it. As Anthony would say at the end of every podcast, go ahead and grab a game off that shelf and let's make every night a game night.